City University Television presents the American Theater Wing Seminars. Working in the theater. This seminar, production.
A warm welcome once again to the American Theater Wing Seminars on Working in the Theater. These seminars, now in their 28th year, are coming to you from the new Graduate Center of the City University of New York. Today's seminar is devoted to the production of the new production, Broadway's hit, The Producers. With the members of the creative and production teams, we will follow the show from its inception to a work for the stage, through to the current production, which is now on Broadway. I'm Isabel Stevenson, Chairman of the Board of the American Theater Wing. I think this seminar will inform and excite you as you see the process that makes a production for the Broadway stage. And now, it is my great pleasure to introduce our moderator for this seminar, a veteran producer and president of the American Theater Wing, Roy A. Sumleo.
Thank you, Isabel, and all. We're delighted to have this group with us today, sparing a few minutes with us, or hours. And let me just introduce you who they are right away. On my far right is Tom Meehan, who's co-author.
Who's helping Isabel?
I'm far left.
Tom Meehan. Next to him is a man named Mel Brooks. Mel is a producer and a genius and co-author, etc. of this.
I'm a writer. I'm a writer-director, but in the newspapers, I'm always comedian-producer. That'll be on my gravestone. Comedian-producer. But all my life, all I've done is really written and directed. That's all I've ever done. But in columns, I am a comic producer.
But he is today.
We'll make our own. We'll make our own.
There's a comic
evaluation.
producer.
We'll make our own evaluation.
Funniest guy I know.
But Roy, he is also our composer of
Yes.
music and lyrics.
We're going to hear all about what
well,
that genius
thank
is.
you.
And on my right is Susan Stroman, we also call her Stro, who's the director and choreographer of The Producers. And then on my left is a producer of the show, Richard Frankel. The general manager is Laura Green, and then John Barlow, who's the press representative of the show. Now, it's our intent to try to develop exactly the history of the show, how it came about, and how it got to be this enormous success it is today. So let's start by asking you, Mel, give us the basic origins of this show, please.
It was a movie. We all know there was a movie called, originally Springtime for Hitler, and then called The Producers because Joseph E. Levine, whose company distributed the film and put up half the money for it, called all of the exhibitors in America, who were Jewish at that time, and said, "What about Springtime for Hitler?" Not on my marquee. So he was soundly rejected, and then so he asked me for another title, and I didn't fight him. I said, "Joe, you're right. I mean, it's too, unless you know the work, just to throw that title up there would be off-putting, to say the least." So I thought of a kind of salute and irony at the same time in calling these two guys The Producers. And it's been The Producers since then. That was 1967. And it was a perfectly fine movie.
Can I back up, though, for a minute? How did you get to writing the movie? You wrote and directed that movie, correct?
Yeah, there was a
the
guy.
Beginning of that.
Oh, the true story is there was a guy in the
Shucks.
There was a guy in the public library when I was doing a term paper, and he was writing something. And I looked over his shoulder, and it said, Bialystok and Bloom, Hitler. I was fascinated. So I stood behind him for hours, making notes. And this guy was I don't know who he was, but I can never thank him enough. Anyway, but I guess you want the true story. I don't know. Years and years ago, I worked for a fella. He used to do shows. Every one of them was a flop. He never had a hit. And he raised money by making love to these dowagers, ladies, these widows who would give him money, and they'd write out the checks to the name of the play, which was always Cash. And he'd raise money with these little old ladies. He was doing swell. But
It's a funny name for a play.
yeah, Cash. He never had a hit. And I worked for him, and he wore an alpaca coat, a kind of charcoal gray alpaca coat, in the winter, in the summer, and he wore his producer's hat. He was never out without his little producer's Homburg. He always had this kind of producer's hat, and he was an unforgettable character, and I loved him. And years later, when I wanted to do more than just be one of the writers on the show of shows, one of the sketch writers, and I said I want to do something bigger, a piece, a play. I began writing a play about this guy making love to these old ladies and having to produce a flop. It had to be a flop because he always raised more money than he could pay out. And if you have a flop, nobody asks for the money back. So that's the genesis of it. And then what's the worst flop in the world? Well, how about something about Hitler, with all the Jews in New York? And then how do you get the world's worst director, and then the world's worst actors? One thing follows.
So you put that into the film.
Yeah, it all worked beautifully. I was lucky. Dustin Hoffman was going to be the first Franz Liebken, the first crazy neo-Nazi, and he came to me and said, I probably won't get the job, but they want me to do a screen test opposite my wife, Anne Bancroft. We were just married, and I said, Dustin, go, you'll be Franz Liebken. Go, you're a little mutt. They're not going to. You're about the funniest looking little guy I ever saw in my life. Why would they want you in Hollywood? Go, do your screen test. You'll be back. You'll be back in 2 days, and we'll put you in. And he got the job. He got the job, and we were very lucky because a couple of days later, Kenny Mars, who played Franz Liebken, walked in, and he was Liebken on the hoof. He was the guy. I mean, he was this crazy Nazi. So that all worked out, and it was my first job as a director, as a film director. I directed in the Borscht Belt and Summerstock, and I directed the sketches on the Show of Shows with Sid Caesar. Not in the booth, but on the floor. It all just was a miracle, just like this show. 2 miracles in my life: the movie and the stage show, because nothing went wrong. The right people fell into this.
We'll try to develop that. Those things don't really happen, Mel. They don't really happen.
I know. They tell me it's a
There are
miracle.
too many other people here on this panel who I'm sure can contribute to that. Now, who was
It was
the
a
first
perfectly
person?
good movie. It never made a nickel. To this day, I get statements from. It goes from one owner. Movies go from one owner to another. People go out of business. They sell their library, which consists of a bunch of movies, to somebody who's still in business. Now, the producers went from Joseph E. Levine, AFCO Embassy, to Dino De Laurentiis, Embassy AFCO, or whatever he was, to a guy called Jerry Weintraub, to some strange place for 2 days. I forget the name. You know, I think it was the Horn and Hardart Cafeteria. They bought it for 2 days, and then it went and it rested in a place called Canal Plus, which is a French company, and they are the owners of the underlying rights together with myself, and they've been very cooperative on helping us with the show. So it's now a Canal Plus movie, and my job is to stop them from getting the DVD out and competing with our show. So that's my current problem. Yeah.
Well, now we all know that you first brought the script of the Broadway musical to David Geffen, I guess. David Geffen was originally involved. Now, when that
I didn't bring the script. He started it all.
He started.
There was no script.
Well, we'll give David all the credit in the world.
He really
except for
was
one
responsible.
fatal mistake. He didn't stay with the project.
No.
But I want to move on to
he had to bow out because he said we had problems. You know, he's running DreamWorks. It's a big company. He has much to be proud of. They have 2 Academy Award movies in a row.
Oh.
Wasn't it? I mean, it was what was it? It was American Beauty, and then it was Gladiator. So, I mean, they do wonderful work. They need his advice, his expertise, and he's got to be a hands-on guy. And he said, even though he started, he called me and said, you got to do the producers. It's a natural for a Broadway musical. And he got as involved as he could, and then he said, I can't really be a hands-on producer because I'm going to be in Hollywood with DreamWorks, and you're going to go to Chicago, and you're going to be casting, and you're going to go to New York. And so he said, just get me a couple of tickets for opening night. He's a wonderful guy.
Yeah, well, we're very pleased because, you know, he happens to be on the board of advisors of the American Theater
really?
Wing, David, yes. And so the only reason we're sorry is that if he had continued as the producer, why, we'd have more access to tickets, which to Richard. Richard, now you're a producer there of the show, and there are others as well. How did you get involved in bringing the show to Broadway?
Well, after the long process of Mel and Stroh and Mike Ockrent of putting the show together and writing it, they had a reading, and after the reading, faced with all the enthusiasm of every producer in town, basically interviewed, more or less auditioned all the producers to pick the people they wanted. And we were chosen.
Well, you are one of the chosen people.
That's right. We are one of the chosen people. Which is entirely appropriate.
Well, Stroh, you mentioned that you were involved. Now, were you involved first, or was Tom involved in the creating the project?
Well, Tom and Mel, because they've done Spaceballs together and also To Be or Not to Be, so they go way back. So when Mel, I suppose, decided to do this, you called your good friend Tom, and it started there first, and then...
Well, I had done 100 years ago, I had done some work on Broadway. The first thing I did on Broadway was New Faces of 1952, Ronnie Graham, Eartha Kitt, Paul Lynde, Carol Lawrence.
They let teenagers write that.
Robert Clary.
They let teenagers write that at the time.
Yeah. It was, and that was a hit. The show was a hit. So I thought, well, that's what you do. Then I did a show called, I wrote half the book with Joe Darien. Joe Darien wrote the lyrics to Man of La Mancha. And Joe Darien and I wrote the book of a show called Shinbone Alley. This was sometime in the 50s, maybe 59, at the Winter Garden. No, it was at the Broadway Theater. It was a very big house. It was a little show. It should have been at the Cherry Lane Theater. It was at the Broadway Theater. Eartha Kitt and Eddie Bracken, based on the Don Marquis stories about a cockroach and a cat. Delicious, wonderful stuff, but certainly not commercial. So that one ran about an hour. Didn't even get into the second act.
Close to page 4.
Right. And then I did the book for All American, which ran for, 3 or 4 months at the Winter Garden. And I still couldn't make a living on Broadway. And then I went to, I guess I made my movie to producers. And from then on, I found film a lot more comfortable and more profitable than Broadway. Broadway is a very
Well, that was
Sorry,
then. This is now. This is
Yeah.
now. You know, you can't make a living, but you can make a killing.
Yes.
You all are
true.
part of that killing right now.
It's
Well,
true.
so Tom
and
got
then
into-
I met Tom when I was making movies. Tom wrote 2 movies, To Be or Not to Be, with Anne Bancroft and Mel Brooks. Jak to be. We sang in Polish, and he also wrote Spaceballs. You know, so we. I
You
really,
also wrote,
yeah.
Tom also wrote Annie.
Meanwhile, I'd written
Yes.
Not
Meanwhile,
at
he'd
that
written
time.
Annie on Broadway, so when I got involved in, when Geffen said, you know, could you do this? And I saw it, and I called Tom and said, when do they sing, you know? Why do they sing? So, I mean, he was, right from the beginning, he was in on how to structure, how to take this wonderful movie and destroy it. So he was there, and he
When
was...
Mel asked me, it took me about a nanosecond to say yes, because I loved the producers ever since it came out. And I always thought it was a musical. It had all the elements of a musical.
How did you find working with Mel? I mean,
I love working with Mel.
had you, no,
It's
was
more
this-
fun than
but you had
anything
worked
in the world.
before this. Had you worked together on before?
The 2 movies, yeah. That was about, we spent about 3 years on those 2 movies in the mid-'80s. I was out in California a lot, and we had a lot of fun doing that.
Well, I mean, your personalities are not exactly alike.
He's Bialystok, I'm Bloom. That's
Exactly.
you know.
But I gather that the net result has a certain amount of your input.
Well, no, Mel wrote the original script. It was an Academy Award-winning script. That was all there. We just did some reshaping and changed it.
He's just
Restructured.
he's being modest, but he's being true also.
Well, Stroh, then you got involved at some point early on.
Yes, I think I'm sure.
We've been working for a while.
Yeah, Tom and Mel wanted now to come to somebody who can structure a musical and make it sing and
Right.
and
Now-
help guide them, because of course Tom did Annie, and of course he knows how to structure a musical, and Mel, coming from this wonderful screenplay, trying to now structure it into a musical, I think was at first probably hard to let go of some things, and then
Very, very hard.
But
because-
once he was introduced to new thoughts of how to guide it, he was off and
Yes,
writing
yes.
music. and-
Well, but
brings-
for me,
and
the
music was
challenge,
poured out of
the
him.
reason I did the whole thing was that the challenge was to write the songs. Now, when Geffen suggested, wisely at the time, you know, don't write the music. Why get a professional? Get somebody who knows how to write music and lyrics, and you just stick to your, you know, what you do. You're a comic and you're a comedy writer. Do that. I said, well, I'm not going to turn in my own mind. I said this to nobody but me. I said, Mel. I said, yeah. Always listen when I call myself. I said, what is it? I said, if you're going to do this, make it exciting. Do what you've always wanted to do ever since you were 9 years old. Write songs. So I said, I was determined to do that no matter what. Geffen introduced me to Jerry Herman, who's one of the great Broadway songwriters of all time. And I've been following his career ever since the Milk and Honey, that far back. Because a friend of mine, Donna Pell, who wrote a play called This Too Shall Pass, which is on our wall. And when you see the set, you'll see The Kidney Stone and This Too Shall Pass. And it's just, so nobody knows this, but it's a salute to Donna Pell, and Donna Pell introduced me to Sid Caesar, and then Donna Pell was the book writer with Jerry Herman on Milk and Honey, so I've been following Jerry Herman's career ever since he began, and Mac and Mabel and Lacage and what,
Dolly.
of course, Mame and Dolly, his big hits. Whatever Jerry did was fabulous. So I met with him at David Geffen's behest request, and I said, David thinks, you know, he said, I love, my favorite movie is The Producers. I love it more than any other movie. And he said, but I can't do it. I said, why can't you do it? He said, well, he said, there's another guy who's perfect for it. And he sat down at the piano and he said, let me play you some of his tunes. And he played Blazing Saddles and High Anxiety, and I'm tired from Blazing Saddles, and Hope for the Best, Expect the Worst, Springtime for Hitler, Business of Love. He said, that's the guy. And I said, I'm that guy. He said, okay, you're the guy. So I went back to Geffen and I said, Jerry Herman thinks I'm the guy. So Geffen said, okay, take a crack at it, but make the, don't make anything tame. He wanted a lot of dirty lyrics.
Well, it occurs to me that maybe not everybody, since the show has just opened a few days ago, maybe not everybody knows enough about the show. So, John, you were good enough to bring us a little bit of footage. Maybe this would be a good time to show a little montage of what the show is. So maybe we can ask to roll the tape for that, please, and we can all get a look at it.
Bloom, the two cardinal rules of being a Broadway producer are: one, never put your own money in the show. And two, never put your own money in the show!
Opening night, it's opening night.
That's professional music, and it doesn't matter if obviously we didn't need Jerry Herman to do that. Now you took over at this point. It's as we're getting back to our tale of getting the show on.
Yeah, so actually, we got my husband Mike Ockert and I got a call saying that Mel Brooks wants to meet you, and we were in rehearsals for A Christmas Carol. And we said, well, sure, maybe we can meet him next week. That'd be wonderful. He said, no, he wants to meet you now, tonight. He wants to meet you in the next hour. So,
very patient man has been.
So we rushed home, and he came over about 7 o'clock. And I opened the front door, and there was Mel, the legendary Mel Brooks. We were so excited. But he didn't say hello. He launched in full voice into the song That Face that opens the second act of the producer.
I just written that song.
He had just written that song, and he just started singing That Face, That Face. And he waltzed right past me, went down my long New York hallway, and ended up on top of the sofa, finished the song, and then he said, hello, I'm Mel Brooks. So that's how we met.
And they liked the song.
We liked the song. And then he just talked about how he had some other ideas for songs, and we both knew the movie so well, and of course we were a huge fan of Mel's, and also Tom's from Annie, and so we absolutely said right away we would meet and talk about how it could possibly be made into a musical, because the structure would really, really have to change. So we started to meet. We actually spent some time in London together.
Mike was so helpful. He talked about a love story for Leo Bloom that would be on the stage. It would be very appropriate for the musical stage. And meeting this tall Swedish blonde, he could climb like a mountain.
So we went to London for about 10 days and sat in Mike's apartment.
Yeah.
And he was a wonderful man.
Structure.
He died at a very young age. He contracted leukemia out of the blue, and he was doing well with it. And then they give you drugs to lower your immunity, and it just he couldn't survive it. And so we were just it was a true tragedy. And
What did John do, though?
I come along much later.
What we did is that we took the show. We asked Susan not to be a choreographer, not to just be a choreographer, but to direct it, because we'd just seen her work on Contact. We saw rehearsals of Contact. We said, This young lady is a great director as well as a terrific choreographer.
And then she did
So-
Music Man last season.
So
Sensational job.
we begged her to take on both jobs, and she did it for Mike's sake, for her husband's sake, and it was never ending. She needed that at that point. It was important for her to really.
He made me laugh.
Yes. and we all glued together.
Did you get any business advice at this point, or were you still totally in the creative sense, or had you thought about cost that Laura is a specialist in? I know she wasn't in on it at that point, but did you? Did anybody decide that maybe you're getting too big or too expensive
Not
at any
yet.
point?
No, because
Well, no, we just went like a runaway train until we got to our April 9th reading of the producers. And then when David Geffen actually gave us the bad news that he wouldn't direct it about a week before our April 9th reading, we got Nathan Lane to do it. We got Gary Beach to do it. We got Katie Huffman to do it. And we got a couple of other people. And Glenn Kelly, our musical supervisor and arranger, was at the piano. And we did this incredible reading, first reading to the world of the producers. And Laura and Richard and Rocco Landisman were invited. And all of these, we had to assemble a bunch of producers in a hurry. Because we needed, we didn't know we needed $10.5 million, but we knew we needed at least $100,000. So that's when we got them involved.
Now you called them all together. Who paid for that? Who paid for that?
This man here.
yeah, it was actually.
I always have $100 on me.
Because it was really, we had a studio and we had these actors and we
wasn't-
just made some we did it ourselves, really made some personal phone calls
Yeah,
on producers that we'd worked with and admired, and we had them come and listen to our reading. But we got it to a point where we wanted to hear it ourselves read back to us too, so it's going to be helpful for us, and then at the same time we needed now to find a producer of the producers. And that was just a year ago in April.
Well, Laura,
So it's happened quite
it was
fast.
very helpful because everyone loved it and the money was raised, but the other thing was that we saw a lot of flaws, and we
were able to-
we worked it very hard the
You
next
sure worked them out, I'll tell you
Yeah.
that.
we did a lot of work and new songs.
It
and
was
things.
not a hit, I can tell you that.
Yeah.
Not then.
Well, now, Laura, first of all, have you ever paid him back for the cost of that first reading?
Oh, yeah.
You've been paid back. Okay.
She paid me back.
So then the next step was somebody had to put this into focus in terms of dollars to decide if it could be done. Now, were you involved in that before the selection of all the producers? Or did that come, what was the next step? You decided who the producers would be.
No, after they decided who the producers would be, we all got together and tried to figure out a sensible financial strategy for it.
Let me
how did we
talk about the producers. Laura's part of a very important team. We sat and decided, instead of just having one dangerous producer, there's always one maniac producer, you know? And he says things like, oh, we're not going out of town. No producer wants to go out of town. They're all the same. All producers are the same. Why? We could rent a studio in New Jersey, and and then we could get a taxi and we'll go to New York. They never want to go out of town. I didn't beg. I demanded. I said, you can't come on board if we can't go out of town, because when you go out of town, not only do you work out the kinks and the bad stuff and cut it out and put new stuff in, but the actors get to bond. They love each other. They work so much better on stage. You can see the love on stage. They're familiar with the material. They love their costumes, their parts. And when they come into New York, they come in as a unit instead of a disparate bunch of actors with egos fighting each other. And, out of town is critical. If you're ever going to do a show, take it out of town or don't do the show. Don't do it.
It's a comedy.
Now
Were you in
so you
agreement with
amassed
that,
this.
Richard?
Yeah.
You amassed this collection of producers, each one with a particular specialty that you felt you needed. So,
Richard Frankel is a wonderful. First of all, he wrote The Best Letter, He wrote a great letter.
Wrote a great letter.
He was at the reading, and he wrote us a
It arrived the next day.
heartfelt letter. I think he spent money for FedEx.
Did you get that back?
FedEx? No, probably.
And, you know, what we did was we talked about the symbiotic relationship of the producers to the work itself. I produced a lot of movies, and I know what it takes to be a producer. It takes a love of what you're doing. Without the love, if it's just business, go away. It ain't gonna happen. You gotta love what you're doing. Richard loved the producers. Rocco Landesman, who runs the Jujamson theaters, the St. James Theater, during intermission, we had a little piano, we did half the show. Rocco Landesman grabbed me and said, "I love this show. You have the St. James Theater if you want it." I said, "Okay, you're in. You're one of the producers." The next day he wrote a letter and I said, "Okay, what do you do, Richard Frankel? I'm a producer. I'm a general manager. I manage shows. I do the bookkeeping. I make sure the scenery goes in and out of the theater." I mean, "Okay, you're the general manager. You're also one of the producers." Then we said, "We got to go on the road one of these days. We need a distribution producer, somebody who knows how to take a show on the road." And there's a company called SFX. They do that, and they do it brilliantly. And so we made them a producer. And then there was this guy, Robert Sillerman, who ran SFX and then sold it and ran it and sold it. And a very wise, bright guy who loved the show so much. I said, "Just for your love alone and your $2 billion, he's one of the richest guys that ever lived." I said, "You're in." So what producer am I leaving out?
Jim Stern.
Well, you guys, I didn't know.
Yeah.
No, you don't know what you get. When you hire a producer, you don't know what you get. He is the original Bialystok. He's got 10,000 little old ladies in New Jersey. I didn't know that. No, really, he'll explain in 1 minute how he raises the money you're going to be embarrassed.
I think that's very important right now.
Okay, so go ahead. At some point, you had to decide how much
Let him explain.
how much money to raise.
We're going to put love.
What do you want first?
Well, first of all, you had to know what your target is, and then how you got to it. So,
Mel insisted on going out of town. I mean, everything that he said about going out of town is absolutely correct. It's absolutely the best thing to do.
You didn't want to do it right away.
Generally, you can't afford it. It cost us almost $2 million to go to Chicago. $2 million extra. So whereas we had been thinking in the beginning that the show might cost $8 or $8.5, after contemplating going out of town, we decided that we had better raise $10.5. Mel was completely right. And in this instance, given him and Tom and Stroh and the material and the rest of it, it seemed like the completely sensible thing to do. In fact, it would seem utterly foolish and suicidal not to go out of town and test the jokes and make and have the cast bond and the rest of it. So it was $2 million, well worth spending. We agreed right away.
and so you created a budget for that, Tom, or you just took that out of the hat?
No,
Did
we
marketing at that point.
Pages and pages.
Pages. It's, I don't know, 20, 30 pages, the budget.
Had you formed an entity at this point? Had you formed a limited partnership or a
Yeah, we had formed a
convention?
joint venture among the producers, and we had was beginning to form a limited partnership.
How do you raise your money?
How do we raise our money? I have 3 partners myself, and one of my partners, Steve Baruch.
You know, it's like meeting a little kid who wants your autograph. Suddenly, an entire family from the Midwest appears out of nowhere. They send a little kid, 8 years old, a cute little kid. He says, "I'm in the book, I say, "Sure." Suddenly, this entire family comes all over. They're taking pictures with you. One of them wants to marry you. It's the same with him. He was the little 8-year-old kid. I didn't know there was this family waiting somewhere in New Jersey.
It takes a village to do this. These are not. Bialystok didn't do shows that cost $10.5 million, and were as complicated as these are today. So we have, over the years, we've produced 30 or 40 shows, 40 to 45 shows. And we have 400 to 500 people who invest with us. And we encourage them to invest relatively modest amounts of money. And we go to them when we're about to do a project, and we ask them if tell them about the project and tell them if they're interested, they should contact us. In this instance, we had $2 million to raise, and $4 million worth of interest arrived.
Explain your
within-
part of it was $2 million.
Yes,
Your
our
wedge.
part of the overall capitalization was $2 million. And $4 million worth of interest arrived within 4 days.
How did you do it? You have more backers than you
Yeah,
get in.
so if we had any nerve, we would have collected all $4 million, invested the $2 and kept the rest.
What caused this buzz? What caused this at the very beginning?
The movie is beloved, Mel is beloved, Stroh, Tom, the entire project had a lot of heat. And you only had to mention the producers. Mel Brooks wrote the music, Stroh, everything else, and people responded instantly. So having no nerve to take all $4 million and pocket $2 and invest the rest, we had a lottery. And Steve Baruch arranged literally to pick names out of a hat, and about half of the people who wanted to invest did. So we have our 200 people. There are a few attractive little old ladies. There are dentists and stockbrokers and all sorts of nice people.
And they each put up about $10,000.
We restricted it to $10,000. People wanted to invest more, but we wanted to involve as many people as we could.
In the 45 shows or more that
Yes.
you've done, have you ever encountered anything like that
Never.
before? Do you think anybody has ever encountered
They've never
that?
had a hit before.
I know a little bit about that too.
We have had a few modest successes, but it's, in truth be told, you are not prepared for this. What we prepare for, what producers and general managers prepare for, is survival in the face of catastrophe. That's what we're good at. That's what requires all the skill, is making a show work when the circumstances are less than perfect. That's what we train for, that's what we practice. This leaves one somewhat unprepared, this kind of success.
Well, John, this I don't know at what point you came onto the team, but clearly this situation poses an interesting dilemma for you. There's a great demand to invest in this show. The word is getting out immediately that this is a hit. How do you proceed then from a promotion, public relations point of view?
Well, like Richard said, there was so much heat on this project. I don't think that there was a person who works in the theater who didn't want to work on the producers, and that's press agents and advertising agencies and promotion people and marketing people. Everybody sort of wanted to. And the sort of beautifully ironic part of this is that my partner Michael Hartman and I just recently started this company. And we auditioned, as it were. We met with the producers a couple of times, and we met with Mel, and we met with Stroh up in her apartment. We didn't go singing down your long New York hallway. But,
They brought me flowers, though. I think.
and Bialys.
Bialys. Yeah,
And it's a press agent's dream come true. I think every press agent hopes that maybe once in their life they can bring theater, they can bring how they feel about theater to a large audience. That's what a publicist does, is spread the joy. And when it's as widespread as the producers is, and when it leaps off the stage and off of 44th Street and out into the mainstream media, you sort of feel as a publicist, it's everything you ever want. It goes beyond publicity. It goes beyond the press agent. You're like, you know what? I can quit now. It's never going to happen.
Did you ever have a show that you represented that was the headline in the Daily News?
I've never had anything that comes close to this. This is
Nobody.
You know, did you see the headline in the Daily News? Producer stampede. Usually it's cops slain in shootout in the Bronx. You know, you never get. You got to die to get a headline.
Well, that's actually coming next. That's coming next as people try to get tickets.
Yeah.
It's going to make the headlines again.
Right.
For months, in marketing meetings, I bored the producers talking about the line the day after opening, and I said, this is going to be like My Fair Lady. When I was a little kid, I used to read this book about the making of Fiddler on the Roof, and there was a picture of a line the day after Fiddler opened outside of the Imperial box office going down the street, and I thought, that's the kind of theater I always wanted to be a part of. And the producers, they would all roll their eyes in unison in these marketing meetings. Here goes John about Fiddler on the Roof again. I said, no, it's true, it's going to happen.
Well, actually,
can you imagine, Roy, the next day, though, what it was like when it felt like Fiddler, My Fair Lady combined, sort of in one day?
There's never been a show with this kind of reaction at all. I mean, we can remember the big hits, whether it's Fiddler on the Roof or A Chorus Line or Phantom of the Opera, but Guys and Dolls and My Fair Lady in their time might have been that big, but nothing has approached this in any time. Now, that poses a problem for you in a way, because if everybody has heard such wonderful things about the show, how do you keep the press from taking potshots at it because it didn't measure up to the hype?
This is one instance, and the singular instance that I can recall, both in my career and in my sort of years of studying the theater, where there have been no potshots. And I think that's a testament to the excellence of the work. There is a feeling of celebration amongst the press and the community, a community which can be notoriously ungenerous. Total generosity, total embrace, total love, and I think that is about one thing, the excellence of what's on the stage 8 times a week at the St. James. I mean, it is indisputable.
Right. I think that in some of the reviews you've only opened last week, the reviews are still coming in. Each reviewer seems to try to outdo the other in his accolades.
First time I ever got good reviews. When the producers opened as a movie, it was killed. Very few critics liked it. Gene Shalit, he wrote for Look magazine, he liked it. And I think somebody in Time magazine, the New York Times destroyed it. Said it was the worst thing that could ever happen on the screen. You know. Well, got a lot of bad reviews.
I'm going to now try to talk about how it cost. How did this come about in terms of cost? Somebody decided they wanted scenery. Somebody decided they wanted costumes, and
a lot of scenery.
And
a lot of costumes.
I mean, at what
Before
point?
we would do, as the director does, a breakdown of how many cast members after we had our, because our reading was only 12 people and they read a lot of different parts, but it's being able to hand them a spreadsheet of how many people I think should be in the company, how many singers and dancers, how many principals we have, how many understudies are needed, or standbys, or swing. So when Laura came on board, it was preparing that for her to then go away and find out how much all this would cost. That spreadsheet of how many people and what they would do also then goes to William Ivey Long, our costume designer, to find out how many costumes he would need to make this happen, and also collaboration with Robin Wagner of how many set changes. So she needed all that information first, so we had to be quite right in our decisions of what we ultimately wanted the show to look like before they can do their budget. And then giving them that information, they can go and now break down how many costumes there are and how many set changes and how many people can play a million different parts.
Stroh wanted to get people that she'd worked with before that she trusted, and Robin Wagner was one of the first names that came up. He did Crazy for You.
Yeah,
and William Ivey Long has done so many of Stroh's shows, and so all these people were just like
William Ivey Long?
He's one of the family of here.
William Ivey Long is our costume designer.
Right.
You just can't throw out a name without identifying.
Oh, pardon
I'm intrigued. Who asked John to come on board, and who asked Richard? Who does the casting, in a sense, for the production? Who starts with it?
Well, Johnson Liff did the casting, and they did the casting for the reading.
No, but the casting for he's going to do the publicity.
That was a producerial decision with the agreement of Mel and
Producerial means
leave love out.
The producers meet. And
That's right.
Who does that? How do you start with that?
Well, we had 4 main producing entities at the time, and we sat down and we batted around our favorites, and everybody agreed on John, and then we had him interview with Stroh and with Mel.
Well, we were very happy with Barlow Hartman. We like those guys.
Had there been any other publicity agents that had applied for it?
Yeah, everybody.
Everybody wanted it. Everybody, all of us had, every press agent that all the producers had worked with at any time in their lives all wanted to do the show, of course.
But I'm intrigued by that. Why is that? Apart from love for Mel, which you said that's the answer, but that really is, there must be more to it than that. That this was such a favorite, this had to be part of it.
It's a wonderful project. It's been known as a wonderful project. It's been the dream of all of Broadway that Mel turned this into a musical for 30 years. Everyone has had this fantasy that one day he was going to turn this
including me.
Let me continue on the thread, if I might. We now know that we have William Ivey Long, the costume designer, and Robin Wagner, the set designer, on board. Now, you told them how much money they could spend on their work?
We certainly talked about it, and several times.
You're talking about the two top people in their field.
Yeah.
So, and actually, I'm sure they worked as collaborators with you.
Yes,
in-
Yeah, the
Yes.
same thing
shows.
like Stroh said about the casting breakdown. William would take Stroh's casting breakdown and see how many costumes were needed for each scene and try and put a number to that costume and ideas of where they would come from.
But did Robin tell you, for example, that, what he thought it would cost, or did you tell Robin what it should cost?
No, neither actually. The good news about these breakdowns, for example, is that Stroh only they only design 24 parts, 23, 24.
23, yeah.
23 parts, which is a relatively low number. When we did Sound of Music, we had a cast of about 40. That was the good news. The bad news was that because there were only 23 people, they have multiple costumes. So we have 320
Gorgeous
costumes,
costumes.
which from shoes to hats can cost $12,000 to $15,000 each in the more elaborate scenes. So there are various different variables that are based upon the requirements of the show. Since the structure of the show is similar to the structure of the film, we had, in terms of scenery, we had a problem in that the scenery had to be, to some degree, cinematic. You go from one location to another location to another location and then back to location A. It demanded a lot of locations, and it being comedy, where it had to be real, you couldn't do something abstract and get laughs. You needed multiple real sets, which put a lot of pressure on the budget, I should say.
Now, what they really want to hear. I mean, this is supposed to be very academic. We're learning how to do shows, learning who does what, how much money the costumes, who makes it. They want to know, is Matthew Broderick fooling around with any of the chorus girls? That's all they want, these little kids. Is Matthew Broderick really in love with his wife? Can we marry him? Can he marry any of us? We don't even care if he's married. We want to marry him. That's all they care about.
Now, I think that maybe that's a great lead into something, Mel.
Something. It's another show, right?
I think maybe we should see that number that about I want to be a producer. Maybe that explains it all.
Show that to the audience.
If we have some videotape, maybe the audience could take a look at that monitor at the same time, and we could see maybe the set from a shot from I Want to Be a Producer.
You could turn it that way.
Turn it, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, there we go.
I want to be a producer with a hit show on Broadway. I want to be a producer, lunch at Sardi's every day. I want to be a producer, sport a top hat and a cane. I want to be a producer and drive those chorus girls insane.
To be a producer with a great big casting couch.
That was the Happily Married Matthew Broderick.
Yes. Sarah Jessica, forget that question that Mel asked. Well, we want to really get into some dollar talk if we can. So, for example, at $15,000 a pop and 320 costumes, did you really spend, how much did you really spend for costumes for the show?
They didn't all cost $15,000.
Thank goodness.
Those you saw.
But did you spend over $2 million on costumes? You didn't.
I would say we spent less than half of that.
Well, that's right. And how about the scenery?
More than that.
Right. Well, I think that what's important to understand, since Mel was the driving force and you're going out of town, and you said it cost $2 million more to go out of town, first of all, did you recover that $2 million while you were in Chicago?
We didn't recover the $2 million, but we offset it by profits from the Chicago engagement.
Explain that.
Yeah, what's the difference?
See that? The producer, we offset it. the hell is offset?
We were a hit in Chicago.
Offset it. We ameliorated it. We
It cost $2 million to go to Chicago.
Right, we
How
made-
much money did you make in Chicago?
800,000.
Wait a minute. That's all you made in Chicago?
That's all we made in
Wait a
Chicago.
minute. I don't get that. I don't understand. What was the gross? What did you gross? What did you gross in Chicago?
That one.
What did you gross in
What did we
Chicago?
gross? No, we grossed
Oh, I'm sorry,
3.8.
that was in that.
What did you gross?
We grossed 3.8.
What does 3.8 mean?
$3.8 million.
Oh! They didn't want to go to Chicago. They grossed $3,800,000 in Chicago.
But the trick is not what you gross; it's what you're left with.
Oh no! It's what you're left with is called creative accounting. That's your bookkeeping. We don't know what really goes on. We're just recipients of little white pieces of paper with numbers. Oh, and that offset. Oh, I see that offset that, and that offset that. So you mean you made $3.8 million, but the actual money.
Very little.
The $3.8 million actually made about $4.50.
So you don't get any.
Somehow they worked that out.
I think our problem is, Mel, you made too many movies.
Yes.
We know the movie accounting.
Why do I see all this on page 6 in tomorrow's paper?
Tom,
So to answer, the net cost to Chicago was about 1.2. Cost us about a little over $1 million to go to Chicago
Was it
to test
worth
the
it?
show.
Was it
Absolutely, every penny was well worth it.
All right.
what about Tom? What did you do in Chicago?
You don't want to know. He looks quiet. He dresses like a writer. He's all kind of tweedy and
But when I get to
corduroy.
Chicago, that toddling town.
Every waitress was saying, "Who is that guy?" He's pinching me all the time. He's terrible.
We can't let Carolyn see this.
No, tell rest.
What did you do in Chicago?
Well,
I mean, other than the waitress.
Mel and I worked on the show about 18 hours a day with Stroh. I mean, we were working.
We didn't get much sleep. We
got
really
a-
worked on the show. Until
Although, uniquely, we went to out of town with the same score we came back with. We didn't replace a single song. We did
we
some
replaced different lyrics. So we
lyrics.
changed some lyrics.
but
Did you
it was the
respond
same
to critics? Did you find the critics valuable in Chicago, or was it your own judgment?
It was our own judgment. The critics were actually too kind to us there. They weren't almost. It wasn't even worth it to read the critics because they were too.
But a lot
We
of-
knew the show was too long.
We were running long in Chicago, and the thing is, we were cutting things that actually worked. I mean, the laughs, and then when we would cut, then the next thing would land even bigger, so the laughs would go longer. So we would get ourselves into a bind because we were cutting really wonderful laughs that were, but the show would have been too long to bring back to New York. So it was very helpful to pick and choose what laughs we wanted when we were in Chicago.
But it was tough.
How did you, amongst yourselves, was there any friction trying to decide on any of these decisions?
When I first came into doing the producers, my first vision of it, before I met Tom and before I met Stroh, was basically what David Geffen had seen originally. It was the producers, the movie, on the stage as a play with music, with maybe you needed Springtime for Hitler, and maybe you needed Prisoners of Love, maybe. But certainly you needed one or two songs, and it would have been a play with music. Then when I met Tom, who'd done Annie, and some other wonderful stuff on Broadway, Tom said, no, a musical is a musical. Then we met Mike Ockrent, and Mike Ockrent said, no, you got to open, you need a curtain raise. I said, what's that? Well, it's a little number at the top of the show that says hello to the audience. And then you have to end the first act with a great big production number. Then I said, oh, I get it. Then Stroh showed me that she kind of cleaned up my act, really. She took all the vulgar stuff out and she polished me up and made me pretty. and she's a genius, she really is. And she showed me what the audience wants and needs on Broadway. A musical comedy. It has to sing, it has to dance, it has to have beautiful girls, it has to look splendid, it has to be funny, it has to be rich. It has to really thrill the audience for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, and she She showed me that, and then in Chicago we worked toward that, to thrilling the audience.
What's wonderful is that the man who created these characters originally was now going to make them sing, and I think that's why it adapted so well to a musical. But now Max Bialystock and Leo Bloom are going to sing and dance about their wants and needs. And that actually heightens it emotionally.
That was the big lesson.
Because now
that was the big sentence. They have to sing and dance about their wants and needs rather than do it in dialogue.
Right.
That was the big revelation.
And because of that, I think the musical actually, you really root for their friendship and you root for their success as producers, which, more so than you do in the movie, because it has been heightened emotionally because of the music.
It works. It works.
Now, the atmosphere sounds like it's very pleasant. Mel, there used to be an expression that when you went out of town, maybe the reason producers didn't want to go out of town was that the way to punish Hitler was to send him out of town with a Broadway musical.
We took him with us.
And
Tom said we took him with us.
But I don't hear any friction. It sounds again like, Stro, you're involved in a show that worked too smoothly.
Very collaborative, and everybody is involved in it is very funny, very witty. The entire company is filled with comedians. Even the ensemble people had to sing and dance and tell a joke at their audition to make us laugh.
They had to tell a joke at their audition in front of Mel Brooks. Can you imagine? And I'd say, okay, go ahead.
Next. So, I mean, they're a very funny group, so the atmosphere in the air was always filled with comic electricity.
As a producer, you've taken shows out of town and in town that looked like they were in trouble and you had all kinds of friction.
Right.
Why not so in this one?
This creative team and this material, I mean, this is a blessed project. And we saw that early on, and within the confines of the financial structure, I think basically see our role as service providers. I mean, our job is to give them what they need. That's what we are to do. What they need also is to stay within a financial context so that the show can work financially for the participants and the investors. But basically, we all saw our job as giving them what will help them do their best work.
Well, and they were sufficiently disciplined to do that for you?
Yes.
Well, but you know,
I think
I just want to say that the producers and many of them, and Richard and Laura, were so good to us. They let us do the show. They didn't step in. They didn't come to rehearsals.
They never said that's too expensive.
Kibitz.
You have to take that out, which is normal. But they never did.
They let us do the show, and that was a great boon to us to be able to work that way.
They were just supportive creatively.
Right.
On this love note, I'm going to ask that we take a brief break and stretch, and we'll come back shortly, at which time we may have some questions from our audience. So
it's okay with me.
This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Welcome back to the American Theater Wing's Working in the Theater seminars on production. Before we turn to our panelists, I would like to remind you that these seminars and the Tony Awards given for excellence in the theater are only a part of the activities of the American Theater Wing. They are perhaps the most visible efforts, but the Wing is so much more than that. As a not-for-profit charity, the Wing's mission is to promote excellence in the theater and to provide educational and humanitarian services through the theater as well. It's a theater we all love, and we want to do as much for it as we possibly can. Our meaningful programs for students include Introduction to Broadway, which in its 10-year history has enabled close to 100,000 New York City high school students to attend a Broadway show, many for the first time. The Wing also introduces young people to theater and the magic it unfolds by bringing professionals into schools for workshops as a part of our Theater in School program. Our hospital program, dating back to World War II, when we created the legendary stage door canteens, continues to provide volunteer professionals to entertain patients in hospitals, nursing homes, aid centers, and child care facilities. Grants and Scholarships Program provides financial support where it is so needed. We take pride in the work we do and remain grateful to our members and everyone who helps make possible the dynamic programs of the American Theater Wing. Our work strengthens the ties between the theater and the community, and we are proud to be a part of this very great effort. And now, some of the people that help make the Wing what it is are on our panel today, and so I'd like to return to the producers and our moderator, Roy Sumleo, President of the American Theater Wing.
Thank you very much, Isabel. I think that I'd like to kind of switch gears from where we were on numbers and bring up the subject of what happened immediately after this raging success is that you raised your prices, so the ticket prices are now $100 each. I think they were $91 going into that. I want to preface this by saying that I believe that it was a proper move, so this is not a critical statement. But I would like to air that a little with you. What was the thinking behind it, and how does it press? How are you handling it with the press?
You want to answer it? $100 is more than $91. Is one answer. No. We thought that it was entirely appropriate for one reason. The tickets were available through scalpers widely at $300 and $400 a piece, and the sort of arbitrary price of $91 didn't seem to mean much. The value of the ticket seems to be much higher, particularly in an environment where sports events, Knicks tickets, there are many opera tickets. The theater is actually, it sounds odd, but the theater is actually underpriced when it comes to hit shows. In all other fields of entertainment, the tickets are far more expensive. We also have the $10.5 million that we discussed to earn back for the investors. And it seemed like an appropriate time and appropriate number to
if you can see if you can develop this for me. I believe that you've done a Broadway musical, and it's a big success. Supply and demand should take over because, after all, this is not an eleemosynary venture. It's a business, and you're in there, and so you place the price where you think the public will pay it. However, there will come a time when the $100 is going to be too much money for many people to pay. And I wonder if you have any plans. I mean, in a perfect market, you would say supply and demand would reign, and eventually you'd reduce your prices, perhaps if the demand shrinks, and maybe you'd come down 90%, or you'd provide lower price tickets. Is any of that in your plans now, so that you can reach a broader market sooner than later on, in 7 or 8 years, when there's a little less demand?
We're still dealing with the consequences of this great success, but I have no doubt, like every other show that we have done and everyone else has done, that sooner or later we're going to get to the very wide, extensive, and deep discount programs that we're all experts on at Broadway. I mean, generally we're all chasing the customer very aggressively, and we're chasing the customer with advertising and with promotion and with prices. On many of our shows in the past, we've had multiple discount programs that have made the tickets widely available to people, but that's going to be a time off, hopefully, with this show.
Well, what I'm hoping for is that you've got a product now which has universal appeal, and what better way to introduce young people to the theater than to expose them to this? So I'm simply hoping that maybe you'd find a way, in your wisdom, to make this available sooner than later to open an audience.
There's also there's a scale of prices too. I mean, the top ticket price is $100, but the tickets exclusive of Wednesday matinees go as low as $46 a piece.
How much?
$46.
How do you know about that?
Just by going to the box office or calling telecharge, you're given a choice. You can pay anywhere between $46 and $100. There's a series of price ranges based on where you want to sit. Not only where you want to sit, but what your budget is. So
do you have any
can't.
student rush? Do you have any tickets available an hour before the show?
Standing room?
We standing room.
But no, I think what Isabel Stevenson was referring to is a student rush, which years ago was something very common, where you could present an identification. And maybe that's something that could into your plans. I know some of the other shows are considering that, whereby to help build an audience at the same time take advantage of the huge success that has been bestowed upon them. So
one of the most amazing things you see if you go to the front of the St. James these days is there's a line for advance sale and there's a line for cancellations. Cancellations are for that day's performance, either the matinee or the evening. And I would say that that cancellation line is populated by probably 80% young people, people who look like students, people who look like they can't pay the $100 but are dying to see the show, a really tenacious group. And the box office and the producers work hard to make sure that as many of those people as is humanly possible are afforded the opportunity to buy a ticket for that performance. But it's just great to see that the sort of young people coming out in droves to stand in line to get in. I mean, it's similar to the way Rent seemed when it first opened, and you had a large influx of young people. We see it every day on 44th Street. It's terrific.
I wonder if you anticipate groupies, such as several of the shows have had groupies. When you mentioned Rent, that was one, and we certainly had.
Tell them about last night.
Last night, those groupies. Stroh, you.
No, I wasn't there.
I was there. There was a group of about 30 guys wearing German helmets. And they came.
They had rented.
They had tuxedos and German helmets, and they came to be groupies, to be producers'
like
groupies. Yeah, like the Rocky Horror Show.
They pulled up in a rented Rommel's car.
Yeah.
With Nazi chauffeur.
Yeah, we're not really pushing that.
Well, I had heard that at some early performances, somebody came racing down the aisle, and someone asked if it didn't happen when I saw the show, and we wondered if they were wondering if it was a plant or not. Can you tell us that story?
What happened?
Well, you had
the man
Racing down the aisle to do what?
Well, with his coat, apparently shouting things at the cast. Was that it? That's the way it came to me.
No, we haven't had
had one.
any problems like that. But one night there was a fella there who was
person.
of an older age that wasn't following the plot, and he got upset when he saw Gary Beach come on stage as Hitler, as he would. And if you're not following the plot, you would. Yeah. That's why within structuring the musical,
he thought it was a show. He thought it was a show saluting Hitler. I mean,
he was upset with his wife because his wife wanted to stay.
Yeah, but I think that was just a one-off.
Yeah, he wasn't paying attention.
Because part of our job was to make sure we structured it so the plot kept being laid out about we're looking for the worst show, the show that's going to offend, to make a flop. So he was of the mind that he wasn't following the plot.
He didn't get it.
Yeah. But we haven't had any.
He hadn't seen the movie either, so he. So he went into the theater and he said, "Oh, we'll see a nice Broadway musical with nice, beautiful girls," and suddenly he said, "That's Hitler." What's going on? I mean, he hadn't paid attention to the
plot.
He also was arguing with his wife because his wife was having a great time and she wanted to stay.
She did stay.
So, she did.
There's almost 100,000 people have seen the show already.
And that was the only
and this guy was the only problem. So.
Could we get back to this love fest that you had out of town? Because I find out of town. Now we've been out of town together. We know that shows don't always work this well. I'm still trying to.
Well, I've been out of town with a show with you, Roy. So we've been there. Richard Rogers' last show, but this
what was the name of Richard Rogers' last show?
It was called I Remember Mama.
And what did you do with it?
We did everything we could to fix it. But it never quite came together.
What was your job on the show?
I was the writer of the book.
Oh.
But I didn't have Mel Brooks. That was the problem.
But I think we made 6 or 8 months out of that at the
we
Majestic
did,
Theater.
Yeah.
But we did not recoup our money. And we didn't make $1 million or $800,000 out of town either when we left.
I don't think so.
But
this was a love fest, by the way. We all got along so well. The fourth person who was part of the creative team, Glenn Kelly, is away right now. But he was the other person.
As a musical
director, he was very close to the creative process with us.
Yeah, he would take I would give him a 32 bar crude and rude, simple little song, and suddenly I'd be hearing this incredible Broadway musical come back at me because he arranged it and chorded it, harmonized it. And,
he's a wonderful arranger. He's done dance arrangements for me on many shows, and he was the very right person to bring on board because the score had to be developed for a lot of dance and a lot of set transitions, and he was really instrumental in helping us find that.
And he was somebody who knew Mel's work very well.
He's very
loved
humorous.
Mel, and he was a perfect choice.
Well, now, how did they stay on budget? Or did you stay on budget? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, we stayed on budget. We came in slightly under our $10.5 million.
Well, does that mean you over-budgeted, or that they were very disciplined?
We're pretty disciplined, I think.
Yeah.
Disciplined.
Stroman's very disciplined.
Right. Well, I mean, you're all very experienced, and I'm sure when you made a budget of $10.5 million, you knew pretty much what you were talking about at the time.
And there's a reserve built in there.
Yeah. I mean, there was it's not to say that there wasn't a dialectic between the designers and us and Stro and Mel about what we could afford and what we can't afford and how do we get this. If we really need this, we have to give up that. But the process seemed to work. I mean, Stro surrounds herself, her production team, surrounds herself with gifted people who are nice and behave as human beings. And it isn't by happenstance that this was a collegial experience.
Well, did you, in the process of building the show, did at any point you throw out scenery or discard costumes? Or
we rebuilt a few costumes. There are a few costumes that they got a better idea later and could be improved upon and were rebuilt.
A couple of drops.
Couple of drops were redone.
We wanted to improve
but
on.
there were no major scenery rebuilds. And I think what that comes from is not only how gifted Robin is, but also how well prepared Stro and Mel were and how well they prepared everybody, how clear the vision was in their head so that everything was communicated to everybody in a very exact way. And the biggest reason probably is that we didn't throw out any songs. We didn't change any. It turned out that all the characters were fully formed. It wasn't as if characters had to be rewritten. Songs would then have had to be rewritten. Things moved from one act to another. We had no major structural changes to the script. And if we had had major structural changes to the script, it no doubt would have resulted in big scenery changes and big costume changes.
But don't you think it's important for all shows to go out of town and to have that in the budget as you do first night parties in the budget?
Under ideal conditions, yeah. I think
Especially
it would
for
be great. It's for
I think it
comedy.
is so
I think
important.
it's very important. The sad fact is, though, that on many projects you just can't afford it, and what you have to do is a much less perfect solution, which is preview for a long time in New York. It would have been terrible in our instance, and we could afford, because of the quality of the participants and the quality of the material, to go out of town. It's absolutely what everyone should do in a best of all possible worlds.
And we haven't really talked about the fact, too, that in addition to it being a great experience creatively in Chicago, the audiences were wonderful, and the press was wonderful. And the press back in New York was supportive. It was, as part of this ideal scenario unfolds, we should give credit to Chicago was a wonderful market for us. And as musicals out of town can often be so dangerous because of the gossip and the word back in New York, the audiences were supportive, the critics were supportive, the editorial press was supportive, and then back in New York, you could feel that. You could smell it back in New York as it began. So it ended up being a wonderful, but it could, it could have gone the other way. I've worked on shows. I worked on a musical this season called Susical, which had a completely different experience out of town in Boston. Which didn't go so well with the press. But I just want to give credit to the audiences and the press.
But let me ask something, John. Had it done its previews and not gone to Boston at all, would it even have opened?
Susical? I believe, yes, it would have.
But I mean, let's say it didn't go out of town. Was Susical, I mean, could it stand the bad buzz, the bad hype, the bad word, and still, survive in New York? It survived because it went out of town, and it got all that bad stuff in Boston, and they worked like crazy, at least to make it presentable for New York.
Part of the reality of the bad buzz are the reviews. When you go out of town, you subject yourself to your local reviews in that market, and you subject yourself to a variety review. So you are coming back into New York with critics having weighed in. That's the reality. That's apart from the gossip or the editorial. You're going to be reviewed. and Seussical was not well reviewed in Boston by Variety or by the two main papers in Boston. And that's hard.
Yeah.
That affects morale, that affects buzz, that affects sales. And it's a crapshoot. You take your chances. You're saying we're going to have the luxury of working on the show, but we are going to let critics. Whereas in New York, if Seussical hadn't gone to Boston, it wouldn't have been reviewed. They could have delayed their opening, and they wouldn't have had any bad reviews to come out from under it.
But they would have had bad word of mouth.
That's right, and that's the important thing. You hear in reviews and in previews, I hear they're in trouble.
Yeah. The
and
buzz.
they're
the
going to
buzz.
change it, and that colors your show for you and your opening.
Well, John, what are you going to do now that you have this enormous set of reviews and great word of mouth? What are you going to do except sit back and smirk?
I'm only smiling because I know this is going to sound trivial. Do you want to know what the most complicated component of my job is now? Ticket requests. It's a wonderful problem to have, but that so many people would love to see the show, and we have a finite number of seats every night to accommodate, and that's difficult. I think what's important now is focusing on protecting the show and protecting all the participants in it, and making sure that that every department on the show feels supported and taken care of, both promotionally and protectively, and that's sort of my job. Is
there a need for full-page advertising now?
Richard?
Briefly, we hope. I mean, there's
you want to do it once to celebrate the opening,
yeah,
right?
we need to do a minimal amount of that, and then we hope that we won't have to do too much more after that.
Well, certainly that's true, but I think it's well that you've made that decision. You've become an institution instantly, so I think that your word is right. You want to celebrate that. Could we now take a minute and, or more than that, and take some questions from our audience, if you will? First question there.
Well, this is to Richard Frankel. My name is Janet Epstein. I was wondering how much profit would that little old lady be making so far on her $10,000 investment, if any?
Oh no, it'll take months and months for the money to be returned to the investors for the show to recoup, which is as opposed to years and years or never and never, which is also frequently the case. So they haven't received. They won't be receiving profits for close to a year.
But I think what we're saying is that in time, and perhaps within that first year, that $10,000 contribution will be returned, and
yes.
then how are the profits being shared on this show between the investors and the battery of producers?
In a equitable but somewhat complicated formula.
No doubt it's equitable. But would you like to tell us the nature of the profit split?
I don't know.
Now we have a new show coming up about that.
Right.
I think
that's the one called Cash.
Yeah.
Is that the one called Cash?
I think we have,
The swindlers.
it's only fair to note that Richard Frankel was a press agent before he was a producer.
It's I mean, as you know, that the company basically splits profits in general with the investors, and that's the case here as well.
Is it a 50-50 split?
In general, yes.
Dollars are precise.
Yeah, sure it is. These are very complicated endeavors.
Well, we got a very sophisticated audience. They're probably going to understand.
It is a 50-50 split.
Well, that's good. That's fine.
Yeah.
We have another question.
Yes, my name is Ruth Greenblatt. This is for Mr. Brooks.
Yes.
When did you first realize that you were funny? Could you describe the moment?
I think that when I saw faces peering down at me when I was in my crib, and for some reason they were laughing. And I said, I guess this is my job. I guess I just have to keep making these funny faces for the rest of my life. But I knew it was in my bones and my blood, and I knew that I was a funny-looking kid, and I made funny sounds, and I was meant to be funny. So that's my job, and I know how to do it.
Well, were you the class clown?
I was the class clown. I was always the class clown. I was the funniest kid at summer camp. I was meant to be funny.
Did it ever get you in trouble?
Sure, with every beautiful girl I ever met. Oh, you're kidding.
He's never kidding.
I don't know if this next question can top that or not. Would you like to try?
Hi, my name is Mary Barker. My question is for Susan. You've been involved in so many successes on Broadway. I'd like to know how you got your start and what was your first successful play.
Well, I guess I've been in a dancing school since I was about 5 years old, and I took piano lessons and guitar lessons, and I grew up in a house filled with music. My father's a great pianist, and so and all sorts of different types of music, and I was sent to all different sorts of types of dancing school. So it's a perfect background to go into the theater because you actually have to know a lot about different styles and different periods and decades and more historical facts about dance in order to support the plot and the time period. And I guess my first, I did an off-Broadway show at the Vineyard Theater called Flora the Red Menace with Scott Ellis, and it was very successful one summer. And Hal Prince saw it, and Liza, and I got to work with Kander Nebb. And so then the next thing was And the World Goes Round, which was an off-Broadway show, and I think that's what sort of exposed me to the masses before Crazy Field. Yeah.
Let's go around the board here. How did you get your first start, Tom?
Somebody asked me to write Annie, a show about Little Orphan Annie. I'd been working at the New Yorker in journalism.
And Annie,
but I'd always been stage struck. I always dreamed as a stage, tried to write plays and things like that, but I hadn't. And I was asked.
Was that Mike Nichols who invited you?
That was Martin Charnin.
Martin
Charnin asked me. We'd met, and he said, "I bet you could write a Broadway musical." I said, "I'd love to." And he said, "If I ever get an idea, can I call you?" And I said, "Please do." And he called me and said, "I've got it, Little Orphan Annie." And I said, "Oh, the worst idea I've ever heard. I don't want to do a show about a little comic strip, two-dimensional." But we did it. And that's,
was it a success? Right. Well, Mel, we've heard enough about how you started. So I'm going to skip and move on. Richard.
How did Richard begin? He was a press agent?
Richard, tell us about yours.
I was always stage struck. I had two inspirational teachers in high school, and I worked at a radio station in college and worked off Broadway. At La Mama as a stagehand and a stage manager, and then a press agent and a marketing director, and clawed my way up to this.
Well, you seem to have done a very good job.
Glad I am to be here.
Laura?
I actually grew up in a very artistic community on Cape Cod called Provincetown, with a lot of artists and writers and painters. And I worked for a very long time with the Provincetown Theater Company before coming to New York, and working for various producers, meeting Richard about 7 years ago.
Oh, very good.
How did you meet him? On what? What were you working on?
It was a blind date.
It was a show called What's Wrong with This Picture that opened and closed quite quickly,
but our run has continued.
Yes. And I went right on to Smokey Joe's Cafe
and
brought Smokey
How
Joe's
did you get your
into New York.
expertise, though? Well, how did you acquire your expertise of being able to be a general manager?
Doing it. Many
Just
years
doing
of
it.
doing
That's
it.
right.
It's all on the job training
Yeah.
for all of us.
Right. And John?
I think I basically spent my whole childhood trying to get people as enthusiastic about the theater as I was. I sort of banged on my family and friends and strangers, anyone who would listen, to say, "Isn't theater amazing?" And I met a guy named Josh Ellis in 1989 who was a great press agent, is still a great press agent, moved to California. I met him on a Friday, and he spent about 6 hours with me telling me what press agents do. And I thought, well, this is exactly what I've sort of been doing. I can't believe there's a job where you can be paid to do this. And at the end of these 6 hours, he said to me, "So what are you going to do now?" And I said, "Well, I'm going back to college on Sunday night." And he said, "No, you're not." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I want you here Monday morning at 10 a.m. You're going to come work for me." And I said, "Are you kidding?" And he said, "No." And I went home, and I packed my bags, and I moved to New York, and worked for Josh.
It's a great story.
And
is it true?
It's a true story.
Well, we're writers.
It's a true story.
We have time for one more question. Can we hear that? Your question?
Hi, I'm Erica, and I have a question for the entire panel. Where were you educated? College, high school, any dramatic?
All in one place?
Start. We'll go around.
I went to Hamilton College in upstate New York and got It's a kind of small liberal arts college, focuses on writing and literature, and I got interested in writing there. It was a great place.
I went to PS 19 in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, then junior high school 50 in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and then a brief a year at Abraham Lincoln High School, another 2 years at Eastern District High School back in Williamsburg. Abraham Lincoln High School is in Coney Island and Brighton Beach. By the way, Eastern District High School also has a Red Auerbach, the Boston Celtics. We have, he and I and I don't know, maybe Barbara Stanwyck. They talk about her. But anyway, I went on from there to Virginia Military Institute. I know it sounds crazy. A little Jewish boy from Williamsburg, Brooklyn, to end up at V. But I did a year's worth of college in 6 months at, took many units at VMI, the Army Specialized Training Reserve Program, sent me there. And then when I was old enough to be killed, they sent me to the regular Army. I was a combat engineer.
So sorry. I have to interrupt this wonderful panel that we have. It's just awful. Well, I'd like you to go on and on and on, but we can't. This is
then I got into show business.
After. Everybody's going to say after today. This has been the American Theatre Wing Seminar on Working in the Theatre, which has been coming to you from the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. I want to thank all of you, this marvelous panel, the people who made the producers possible, and for their wonderful contribution of sharing their knowledge and time and talent with us at the City University, the Graduate Center, the City University of New York. Thank you so very, very much.
I'm sorry for asking such a long